From the Arkansas Times on Monday, May the 8th, another beautiful day unless you're one of the thousands of people in Arkansas that are still coping with flooding. The flood systems are high, and the water is high, excuse me, in the Black River, the White River. It's moving down to the Arkansas River, and a great part of Arkansas has had to cope with terrible problems from this. On other fronts, fallout continues from votes in the House, U.S. House last week, on a health care bill to replace Obamacare. The reaction, as I said last week, has been brutal. There was a demonstration on the square in Bentonville Monday calling Steve Womack into account for his vote for the health care legislation. Demonstrators turned up outside 2nd District Congressman French Hill's office in Little Rock this morning to say their very lives were endangered by the changes that are in the health care bill that French Hill voted to approve. A lot of people are catching on, too, to the fact that the Obamacare legislation, good as it is for people's health and lives, is also an enormous economic stimulus nationwide and certainly in Arkansas. If Asa Hutchinson continues to cut 60,000 people off Medicaid coverage in Arkansas and they don't pick up coverage in the health system marketplace, which many of them will be unable to afford to do, ultimately this is going to mean a loss of jobs in Arkansas and a tremendous drop in tax revenue as a result. Some people are thinking maybe that it's good business to have good health, even though perhaps health care for all people ought to be the first thing we're concerned about. Elsewhere, the Arkansas Legislature today, House Speaker Jeremy Gillum and the Senate President Jonathan Dismang appointed members of a so-called tax reform task force. I say so-called because reform is kind of a loaded word. One man's reform is another man's lack of progress, as we know. Most of the people on these committees will be Republicans, of course. Reform to them will mean cutting taxes. That may be bad news for some people in government. Cutting taxes means a still further reduction in revenue. We already know that the budget has been cut this year and cut again next year because of a shortfall of revenue. State workers just learned last week that the merit pay decision for this year, and it wouldn't have been much to begin with, has been put off at least for another month to see if there's enough money to pay for it. At best, state workers, about half of them will get a 1% pay raise. So the talk of more tax reform, which may mean more tax cuts, can't be received very well by them. It's about to be an election day in Little Rock. Little Rock School District voters will vote tomorrow on continuing 12.4 tax mills that pay for construction debt. There's been a big turnout in early voting. More than 1,700 votes have been cast. This is more than were cast in all total elections over the last 5 years. There's high interest in the tax. Perhaps bad timing for those who favor the tax was a story in the Democrat Gazette this morning. It talks about 4 more applications for charter schools in Little Rock, with backing from the powerful Walton Family Foundation, at least on the edges of advisory roles, and certainly in the case of one school. They're going to pay to have a school built to be taken over by a charter school, which almost certainly will mean the loss of more students and more dollars from the Little Rock School District. State Education Commissioner Johnny Key, who's running the Little Rock School District, seems to think this is fine to continue to draw students from the school district. If that's so, you have to wonder why we're borrowing a lot of money and incurring debt obligations when the school district is going to be looking at thousands more losses of students. It's something to think about in the school election. The Walton Foundation, by the way, put out a statement that said there are no good high-quality education options for children in Little Rock. It was an insult to me because they're going to build a school within just a few blocks of where my own children went to school, and they turned out okay in my view. It's just not true that there aren't good schools in Little Rock. There are plenty of them. It makes no sense to create new schools in a town that has more schools than it needs and more seats than it needs, which is exactly why Little Rock District's cutting its budget in the first place. Interesting story out of Camac Village, the little municipal island that sits up in northwest Little Rock. It's a popular place for people driving down to the riverfront parks, Murray Park and Rebsman Park Golf Course. Well, they stopped one car that was full of gangbangers, apparently with guns and drugs, heading down to a big gathering, what was said to be a major gathering of a large multi-state gang down in the park. They tried to stop another car, but were outrun by the high-speed Dodge. So the Little Rock, the Camac Village Police are notorious for their traffic enforcement, say that this shows why it's a good thing. It's not just about people rolling through stop signs. Speaking of streets, the Little Rock City Board of Directors tomorrow is going to add to its agenda an item that will allow a second cab company to operate in Little Rock. For years, it's been a monopoly for the Yellow Cab Company. A little guy named Ken's Cab went to court to establish the right to operate cabs here too, and he won in court grudgingly. The city's going to let him operate. There's a great story for you to read, a sad story, but moving at the same time, by a young man named Rawleigh Williams. He was the leading running back for the Razorback football team last year. He had a recurrence of a neurological injury in spring practice. He decided it's a signal. It's time for him to hang up the football cleats and just be a student after all. He speaks in very warm and generous terms about it. It was a tough decision. I think it was the right one, and I recommend it for your reading. The biggest news of the weekend, of course, was the election of Emmanuel Macron as the leader of France. It was a victory of globalism over nationalism. People who tried to support the election of his nationalist opponent were some of the same people who helped elect Donald Trump. So it was a little bit of a loss for those people on the alt-right, so-called, to see the new man walk up in a very moving moment at the big museum in Paris to the tunes of Ode to Joy. It was a joyful occasion in France. Keep resisting. Maybe we can see something happy like that here. I'm Max Brantley. I'll be back tomorrow.